Greetings, my friends. I hope this day finds you well. Today I would like to introduce to you Chapter 1 of the new book, Protectors of the Nations by Captain Clare. First of all, I'll take a moment to apologize for the hollow echo of this recording and let you know it is by no means studio quality. But if you listen to the content rather than the presentation, I believe you will find it powerful and encouraging, challenging our mighty men to rise up and take their positions of authority and honor among our nations. Mighty men bring safety to God's people, bring stability to their nation, bring honor to the kingdom, bring unrivaled and overwhelming terror to the enemy. In these days, the nations of the world are in desperate need of mighty men. Learning the practices of the mighty men of old sheds light on the way. This path, so rarely trod, has overgrown with cultural discrepancies that hinder the development of true mighty men. Raising up mighty men, not gender related, but those who excel in deeds of valor, walking in honor, carrying a great and unwavering resolve, understanding a difficult past need not ruin their future. This is the reason for this series of books. Oh, may I first give you a note from the captain? It is my hope that this book may help you look deeply into what you believe and confirm your beliefs according to God's written word. We, of course, do not have written dialogue on the thoughts of these biblical characters, but I tried to put into words the feelings that may have accompanied their real-life situations. It is my prayer that each of us can find more depth in and relate closer to the Bible stories that we know so well. Please read the accounts in the scriptures for yourself and allow the Holy Spirit to guide you into all truth. Shall we start? Protectors of the Nation, from Misfits to Mighty Men. Chapter 1, The Crushed Soul. Unable to process his thoughts, he lay motionless in a small ditch by the roadside. Veiled by the tall, dry grass, he remained unnoticed as a detachment of soldiers reassembled and marched out of town. Watching closely, he confirmed the deranged murderer that had started all the killing had left town with the soldiers. A full moon was on the rise, and it appeared on the horizon, much larger than life, in a deep tone of red. On any normal evening, its beauty would take one's breath away, but this evening it cast an eerie light over a silent village. The aura of death was so heavy it seemed to have a stranglehold on this one lone survivor, and carried a resolute intent of adding him to the casualties. With his breathing very shallow and irregular, the only sound the survivor could hear was the intense pounding of his own heart. So loud and intense within his own head, he was convinced it would notify the killers of his whereabouts. But they were gone now. A rogue thought streamed through his dimly lit consciousness. What difference would one more death make in this day of extreme injustice? He remained in this sprawled-out position where he fell for what seemed an eternity, completely unable to raise himself up, silently watching the great massacre unfold. With a multitude of feelings from anger to fear to ultimately complete despair surging through his soul, he tried to cry out in defense of the innocent, but he couldn't utter a single word. He felt so pressed to the ground beneath him that he could barely breathe. Time passed, and he could feel the chill of the night encroaching, but somewhere, somehow, he remained warm. With much difficulty and great effort, muscle by muscle, he began coaxing his body back into reality. Finally, he forced himself up on his knees. Only then did he recognize the fact that he was soaking wet. With the evening chill penetrating much deeper now, he began sinking back down into the warm water as he surveyed his surroundings. No longer hearing the pounding of his own heart, he slowly became aware of the fact he didn't hear anything at all. The village was without a sound. Not the noise of a single animal or even the buzzing of an insect was heard. Looking up the road from his higher vantage point, he could clearly see his fallen friends and family, along with a great number of animals from the village that had been slaughtered. Suddenly he recognized with extreme anguish the water that had been warm on his skin and gently flowed around where he lay was not water at all. It was the lifeblood of his village. Horrified at the grotesque reality of his plight, He drew himself out of the ditch and forced himself to his feet. Plodding slowly out of the village, his mind began to clear. He tried his best to consider where he could possibly find safety. He knew life would never be the same again, and he asked himself, what now? What should I do? I'm the only priest. The word priest charged his system like a lightning bolt. He suddenly knew without a shadow of a doubt that he had been spared for a purpose, and he spun around and headed back to the village at nearly a trot. His mind protested loudly. You should by no means return. What if just one soldier remains? You don't want to see all your friends lying dead. You can't. You shouldn't. What if? With extreme determination, he returned and started his search. Finally finding his father's body in the mass of corpses, he realized quickly it wasn't there. Of course not, he thought. He wasn't performing his high priestly duties at the time of the massacre. The atrocity that took place in his village that day burned deeper into his consciousness than he ever imagined possible, as he saw the lifeless faces of his deceased friends. He was determined not to leave the village until he found what he was searching for. He hadn't seen the king or his men steal it, which in itself was amazing, but there had been so much chaos in the village during the massacre. Many miles from his home, not sure exactly of his destination and suffering greatly from dehydration and fatigue, he forced himself along as stiff of a pace as he could muster. The evening sun was high in the sky, and he wasn't sure which day it was, when suddenly a man seemed to appear from nowhere. A man was now asking him numerous questions and seemed genuinely concerned for his welfare. He hadn't seen him up ahead, and he was sure no one had been following him, but here he was. He hesitated, then he told the man he was looking for David, who he believed was somewhere in this area. The man signaled, and 3 additional men stepped out of hiding. They were right there, yet he had not noticed them. Astounding, he thought. I must be in worse condition than I thought. Greatly astonished at their kindness to one who looked mentally and physically exhausted, was covered with dirt and dried blood, wore stained and torn clothing, and was a traveler with no bag or provisions for the trip, he graciously accepted some water and a cake of figs. The men were exceptionally helpful and didn't continue their questions, but invited him to follow their lead. They kindly but gently assisted him off the beaten path and through the wilderness to the mouth of the cave. By this time the sun had gone down, and the stars were shining brightly. There were many men there. His new friends provided him with water and soap to clean up, gave him some clean clothing to wear, and told him to wait for their return as they disappeared into the night. A meteor blazed across the horizon, coaxing David's attention back to reality. Reality was that he was daydreaming about sitting out in the field watching his father's sheep. But it was night. Can you daydream at night? A big smile crossed his face, the first smile in many days. His thoughts promptly returned to his current dilemma. How did he end up here? It seemed that only a moment earlier he was sitting at the king's table, in a place of great honor, and in the next instant he found himself sitting by this hole in the rocks in a place of great dishonor. Yes, the hole in the rocks being a cave where he spent the day hiding from his king. King Saul, the ruler of his homeland, along with 3,000 elite men of war, were currently on a search and destroy mission. The orders from the king were, dead or alive, I want David. So forceful was the command that the king himself accompanied the soldiers. Another reason King Saul accompanied the soldiers was that only a short time earlier many of these men were under David's command, a detail that brought much uneasiness to the king. Paradoxically, how could one of King Saul's top commanding officers be on the run, having done no wrong, having no trial, and actually having no accusations? How could the king's own son-in-law make the most wanted list? A friendly voice brought David's thoughts back to the present. Excuse me, Commander. It was the voice of Abishai. This one is a good man with much potential, David thought. Then he responded with, how did your patrol go today? Any interesting activities in the area? Yes, very unusual, Abishai said. With that, he had David's full attention, as Abishai was not one to make a big issue out of nothing. Abishai continued, we came across a young man who looked like he had been attacked. He was in terrible condition, close to his end, I might say. His clothing was saturated with blood, and he was covered with mud and dirt from head to toe. I didn't see how one could lose that amount of blood and still be walking. He wasn't walking well, but he was walking. He had no bag, no staff, no money. He carried only a small package, something wrapped in a cloth, that he was extremely protective of. In his exhaustion, he tried to hide it from us, but that didn't go well for him. I suppose I surprised him a bit as I approached him on the road, for he was not very aware of his surroundings after his initial fright, and while trying to hide what he was carrying, he asked if I knew where he could find you. He kept saying, David, David, I'm looking for David. We gave him some water and food and brought him back here with us. The thing that has me most concerned at this point is that when we helped him get cleaned up and wanted to bind his wounds, there were no wounds. I don't know where all the blood came from, but it's not his. He offered no explanation, only that he must see you. Even when we were helping him clean up, he kept real close track of his parcel. He is under extreme duress. Shall I bring him to you? Yes, by all means, David said. We need to find out what is so terribly urgent. The moon was now rising to join the stars, and by its light David immediately recognized the young man they were bringing to him. Standing to his feet with his arms outstretched, David greeted him, Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, are you well? Abiathar wrapped his arms around David and sank to his knees, sobbing profusely. David motioned for the other men to leave them and got down on his knees with Abiathar, giving him time to find his voice. David asked gently, My son, is your family well? Is Ahimelech okay? They're all dead, Abiathar said weakly. An extreme anger arose in David as he asked, Who did this dreadful deed? We shall immediately track them down. They will pay for this extreme injustice with their lives. Who is overseeing the village? Your father was the owner of Nob. Abiathar said, I alone escaped. There is no one. He wept profusely, unable to speak for some time. David waited, not pressuring him in this terribly difficult situation. Finally, Abiathar's sobbing slowed, and with shaking hands he produced the package and gently unwrapped the cloth, revealing Ahimelech's high priestly ephod. David said, You did well, my son. Abiathar related his devastating account to David and said, My father sent me on a short trip to the neighboring village with a message for their leader. Upon my return, I noted that King Saul had arrived with a contingent of soldiers. All the priests had been assembled and brought before the king for questioning. I wanted to boldly join my father standing before King Saul, but something on the inside forbade me. I stepped off the road and hid in a ditch nearby, watching through the tall, dry grass as the atmosphere went from bad to worse. The king was very angry, and he carefully questioned my father. It was plainly established that my father and those who served under him had done no wrong. The questioning was all related to your visit to their town a short while before. Father told the king that you were on urgent mission for him. The king Saul said there was no such mission, and asked roughly what he gave you. Father said he gave you the sword of Goliath, whom you had killed in the service of the king, and some food, and sent you on your way. After all this was established, King Saul ordered my father killed for treason. It was such an atrocity that King Saul's own elite guards, at the risk of losing their individual lives, would not carry out the king's orders to kill the priests. However, Doeg, the fearful one, for self-serving reasons, jumped in and killed my father. He didn't stop there, but he killed the priest standing next to father also. Saul openly witnessed the other priests being murdered, but did nothing to end it. Turning his back on the priests and facing the soldiers, he commanded, Kill them all! Like a pack of hungry animals with the smell of blood in the air, the killing intensified. With 85 priests put to the sword, lying in a great pool of their own blood, the men of the village stood quietly in the doorways of their homes in unspeakable unbelief. They had their families hidden behind them, trying to shield them from the inhumane massacre that had just taken place. Some quietly choked back tears, while others with ashen faces struggled to remain standing. I tried to get up and join my father and friends, but I was frozen in my hiding place, pressed to the ground and unable to move. My father and the other priests died without lifting a hand against their king. The Holy Spirit had unmistakably departed from King Saul, and the Spirit currently visiting him persuaded him to allow the killing to continue. The men were dragged from their homes and slaughtered along with the priests. My body remained frozen in place. Looking back, I realized in that way the Lord saved my life. But many times since, I wish I had died with them. Next, screaming erupted as the ladies tried to protect their young boys, when they too became a target of the killers. With every male in the village lying dead in the streets, the killing continued, as the older women were snatched away from the mothers, who were trying desperately to keep the remaining children safe in the chaos. Abiathar sobbed uncontrollably as he recalled the events. After many minutes, he regained his composure and continued his terrible story. He said, I thought things would surely subside, as the killing had already gone much too far. But as the numbers of dead increased and the streets flowed with innocent blood, the killing rage intensified. High-pitched screams accompanied by pitiful wailing filled the air as mothers were killed in the presence of their children. At this, Abiathar fell face to the ground and wept profusely. David gave him time and then helped him up from his sprawled-out position on the ground. Finding his voice, he apologized to David, saying, I'm so sorry. I'm a priest, not a warrior. I have much difficulty relating these events. I can't seem to get them out of my mind. David comforted him with kind words and promised Abiathar that he would personally take care of his every need for the remainder of his life, and that Abiathar would be the priest unto the Lord with him and his men. With much difficulty, Abiathar continued his account, saying between sobs, David, they wouldn't stop. They just wouldn't stop. Nursing mothers with children in their arms, pregnant young ladies alike were ruthlessly killed with the sword. With an awful look of despair, he said quietly, the sounds got quieter as fewer and fewer young girls remained. They killed the infants, David. The crying stopped one by one. They killed the babies one at a time in cold blood until all the crying stopped. Abiathar looked at David as though he could cry no more. David hugged him tightly and wept. Finally, Abiathar continued in a weak voice, saying, it was far worse than I could ever imagine, but it still didn't stop. The merciless annihilation was not called to an end. The cattle were rounded up and put to the sword. The eradication continued with the sheep, then the beasts of burden, the donkeys, the oxen, the horses. I could see Saul's brazen face and deep hollow eyes that approved of this terrible atrocity. He did not relent until no living man, woman, child, or animal remained in our entire village. I alone escaped. I had no place to go. My king would kill me if he found me. David took full responsibility for the ruthlessness and the killings. Abiathar tried to argue that it wasn't David's fault, because King Saul had plainly gone mad and was acting on behalf of their evil spirits. However, David said, please forgive me, my son. I was not truthful with your father. Then he looked to the heavens and said in earnest, Lord, please forgive me of this great atrocity. I acted wrongly and caused much devastation. Lord, I also request that you bring healing for Abiathar and give him strength to forgive me also. Before you, my Lord, I promise to care for Abiathar and provide for him. David again asked Abiathar for forgiveness and assured Abiathar that he would do everything in his power to take care of him, compelling him to stay with him and his men to be their priest. David wondered, how can I bear the weight of such a devastating injustice, all because I lied to Ahimelech? He quickly reminded himself that he had asked forgiveness from the Lord and from Abiathar, and he needed to allow healing to come that only forgiveness could bring. He sternly reminded himself to never again reopen that deep wound by replaying the account in all its vivid details in his mind. Related to 1 Samuel 22, 9 to 22. Notes: mighty men take full responsibility of their actions. Forgiveness alone can heal wounds cut this deep. No amount of medication, therapy, or counsel can take the place of forgiveness. This concludes chapter 1.